All right, this past weekend we seen Deontay Wilder lose to Joseph Parker in a fight in which was so unlike Deontay Wilder. He lacked so much aggression. He lacked that killer instinct. He lacked that hunger for battle. He lacked that fire. He lacked a lot of things in there. And a lot of people, myself included, are asking the question: does Wilder still have it? Is it gone? Does whatever he had, is that still there? That's a good question, and to be honest with you, I really don't know. The way he's been speaking, it sounds like it probably is. Will he carry on boxing? I don't know. If he does decide to bow out, so be it. But I think I need to go look at Wilder's career, look at his resume, go through everything, and really dissect it, and ask the question: what the F happened to Deontay Wilder? So Deontay Wilder started boxing at around about the age of 19. Went into Sky Boxing Gym in Alabama, and I remember his trainer, who still he works with now, JD's, said that within something like a month or so, in a very short space of time, he was already dropping guys in sparring. And from that point, they were like, okay, we've potentially got something on our hands here. He went on to have his amateur career. Now, the primary reason why Deontay Wilder turned to boxing was to look after his daughter. His first daughter, I think it was spina bifida she was born with. So obviously Deontay thinking, okay, we need money. Boxing is a way that we can make money. It's a very noble reason to get into the sport. He got into it, and if you go on BoxRec, now I believe Wilder had more amateur fights than the 30 that are listed on BoxRec. BoxRec have him down as 24-6. In the amateurs, everyone loses. Floyd Mayweather has lost. Nearly everyone loses. I think Chocolatito went through it undefeated, as did Sugar Ray Robinson. But for the most part, you will take L's. You can be the best in the world, but you'll take L's in the amateurs. Right? So you don't read too much into the losses, but you look at the names. Wilder's first loss officially on BoxRec was in the final of the Alabama Golden Globes in 2006. Fought a guy called Brad Gwynn, who that's the only fight he has listed on BoxRec. So he can always say, if he's never done anything else in boxing, he has a win, at least in the amateurs, over Deontay Wilder. When you look through, there's not... I mean, this is probably an indication as to how thin on the surface the amateurs were back then, well, maybe even still now, but how the American boxing scene wasn't really churning out any particular talent. Because you look at the guys... And this is before the Rio Olympics, this is before the Beijing Olympics. There's not really any names there on Wilder's resume. I mean, Isha Thomas, that does ring a bell, but other than that, there's not really anybody there. One of the most noticeable wins I can see here that is on Deontay Wilder's record is actually in Russia. He fought Rakhim Shakayev and he beat him on points. Now, Rakhim Shakayev went on to be a cruiserweight contender in his own right. He challenged for the WBC title, I think, against Gregory Droz. He was a very, how would you describe, a very muscular kind of guy. He fought like someone who hadn't eaten in a couple of days. He would throw everything at people, but he had a really poor gas tank. Deontay Wilder got a win over him, but then he was stopped, and there is footage of this fight by Evgeny Ramon, who himself hasn't had a stellar pro career. I think he got beat by Tabisa Machunu, if I'm not mistaken. But he was able to get a stoppage win over Deontay Wilder. They're two names that really do spring to mind. As for the rest, again, there's not really many names there. He did win, as I said, a bronze medal in the Beijing Olympics. He ran into Clemente Russo in the semi-final. Clemente Russo, seasoned amateur from Italy. Seasoned, I mean, he was still fighting amateur up until 2021. Fought the likes of Anthony Joshua, Victor Vickhurst. Who else has he fought? You don't have to look at his resume and it's a who's he, or it's a who's who, I should say. Marco Kalic, we know him. Junior fought, lost to Alexander Usyk. I think he lost to Usyk a few times, but he's fought pretty much everyone, Clemente Russo, in the amateurs. So that's who Deontay Wilder lost his last amateur fight to. Now, to be fair, you could say the same with Joshua, but to only start boxing two and a half years earlier and to be winning a bronze medal, I believe he was the only boxer from the US squad to win any type of medal in that Olympics. That's still impressive. It is still impressive to have such a limited background, in the sport of boxing, started so late, to be able to get to that point is very impressive. Now, what Deontay Wilder did off the back of that was he turned professional, Made his pro debut November the 15th. The 15th of November, I should say, 2008, against a guy called Ethan Cox, who was 2-2-1. Wilder weighed in at 207 pounds. That might still be his career lightest. He got the win. I had to stop and look there because Gervonta Davis, it's not Tank Davis. I had to stop and look. I was like, is that the... No, it's not that Gervonta Davis. But that was on the same card as Jermaine Taylor, Jeff Lacey. So, and it says here on BoxRec that was actually on HBO. Wilder stopped Ethan Cox in 2 rounds. That was his first win. Very light Deontay Wilder. Cox was only 201 pounds. Then he goes on a run of just getting first round knockout after first round knockout. I believe when Wilder turned over, because he was with Golden Boy for many, many years. And if you'll see on BoxRec, when you look at some of these fights and you look at the cards that they were on, a lot of them were done by Richard Schaefer. Richard Schaefer was the guy with Golden Boy for a while. Had his next fight, then he gets very active. So that was in 2008, November 2008. Didn't fight again until March 2009. So a couple of months of rest, but he's back in there. He's nearly a stone heavier, or half a stone heavier, 213 pounds, which is a weight that throughout the years Wilder has kind of stayed in or around that region of the 210s to low 220s. Fought a guy called Shannon Gray, who had 1 win, no losses, never fought again after this fight, mind you. But Deontay Wilder headlined that. That was in Mississippi. There's, again, no real names on the card that you would spring to mind. Then he fought Richard Green Jr., who again had a losing record. That was only a week after that fight. And actually, this was on, Adrian Broner fought on this card, as did Devin Vargas. Devin Vargas, I think he was definitely seeing... That was definitely a highlight of his career. He was unbeaten at the time. But that was in 2009. That was a long time ago. Fought guys like Charles Brown, Kelsey Arnold. Again, some of these guys you wouldn't have really have heard of. So Wilder, he was fighting regularly. I mean, you look at 2009. I mean, he was just fight after fight after fight after fight. First round knockout after first round knockout. Scarce footage of some of these fights is there. But what is there, you see it. That Wilder has really good punching power. I mean, you can see that straight away. That there's really, really, really good punching power there. Richard Schaefer, when he fought Joseph Rabida, I think is how you say that guy's name. Richard Schaefer obviously was the promoter for then. So Wilder was getting some exposure. He was limited, even as a pro. He was very limited in terms of his background. He was really doing his learning as a pro. And to be honest with you, when you have that kind of limited background, you don't begrudge a guy having easy fights to start off with, right? And again, you look at 2009, loads of fights in that year, all first round knockouts. There was really kind of nothing to really worry about at that point. In 2010, had his first fight in April that year against a guy called Tay Cobb. Erislandy Lara fought Danny Perez on top of the card. So he's on some of these fights over in Las Vegas. He's on the undercard. So he's getting a little bit of exposure there low down the card. One of the fights that people love to bring up is this fight right here. Now, this one happened in July of 2010. And what would I say? Amateur footage, if even. It's basically a fight that's filmed by a phone against a guy here called Dustin Nichols. Right? Now, Dustin Nichols, his career record is 5 wins, 15 losses. His name is the Big Worm. Okay? Now, this guy right here, he looked... he was nearly 400 pounds. He was 398 pounds. Wilder was 215 pounds. So there was nearly a 200 pound weight gap between the two. Wilder stopped this guy in a round. He didn't come out for the second round. But people love to bring this fight up for a specific reason, and you'll see on screen just there. People love to say that fight Wilder got dropped. In my opinion, he didn't. The referee was right to call that a slip. His feet just got all over the place, got tangled, and he went down just purely on balance, right? I wouldn't rule that a knockdown, but people bring that fight up. Now, that fight right there, what fight was that for Deontay Wilder? I think that was his 11th fight. To be still moved that slow, right? I know we'd only been pro not even 2 years, but to still be fighting in around that level, you would kind of raise a little bit of an eyebrow. He had his next fight then against a guy called Shannon Cuddell, I think is how you say that guy's name, Dominic Wade, who ended up fighting Triple G. Eric Hunter, I believe that's the Eric Hunter who fought Lee Selby, on the Joshua Martin undercard, and Gary Russell Jr., who we all know who Gary Russell Jr. is, also fought on that card. So it is actually quite incredible when you look back at fighters, like Deontay Wilder. Kell Brook is a good example as well. And you look at their early careers and you see the cards they were on, and you kind of forget, like, oh wow, yeah, he fought on this card, he fought on that card. And you think back to late on in their careers, like we'll say Kell Brook, kind of when he was IBF champion and a bit after. The guys whose undercards he was fighting on back then, the Paul Smiths of the world, the people like that, they probably would have given an arm and a leg to be on a Kell Brook undercard years later, and he started out fighting on their undercards. It's crazy to look at some of these cards and to just say, like, wow, what happened there, and look where one's gone, look where the other has gone. Now, we move on to the very next fight. Now, this fight right here is a fight that some would say is a piece of boxing lost media. And I think that's fair to say, and there's plenty of boxing lost media out there, and this fight may very well be one of them. Richard Schaefer was the promoter. Seth Mitchell was on the card as well. For those who don't know, Seth Mitchell was what would you call him, a prospect or contender? Probably more so a prospect. Seth Mitchell basically I think he was a football player originally. He was a big, strong heavyweight. He last fought in 2013, 6'2", and he had no chin. He actually got a win over Shez Witherspoon, who that might be his best win, who Alexander Usyk obviously made his heavyweight debut against. He was stopped in 2 rounds by Jonathan Banks, avenged that loss to Jonathan Banks. Jonathan Banks, the trainer of Vladimir Klitschko, and then was knocked out in a round by Chris Arreola. Very poor heavyweight, had no punch resistance to speak of. Wilder fought on this undercard, all right? Now, Wilder fought a guy by the name of Harold Sconas, right? This guy is a journeyman, 18 wins, 27 losses, and 2 draws, but it's all said and done. He's not fought since 2013, lost to Alexander Flores, lost to Richard Towers, actually has a win over Jamil McCline, a majority decision win over Jamil McCline in 2012. McCline was a fringe contender during the early part of the Klitschko reign. He was athletic, was McCline, but he didn't really have much to him. He didn't have a particularly good chin. But this guy has also lost to the likes of Kevin Johnson, Cedric Boswell, has a loss over Jason Gavin of all people. Bermain Stavern stopped him in a round. Darrell Williamson, Eric Kirkland, who was actually a much bigger puncher than his record suggests. Who else has he lost to? Lost to Razor Ruddock. Who else has this guy lost? Because there's names here you'll just see and you'll be like, oh, I recognise this, recognise that. I actually got a win over Ray Austin. That's crazy. I'm surprised he even got that win. But this guy, right, journeyman, fair to say, maybe you would even argue a bit of a step up for Wilder, although he had 20 losses going into this fight. Wilder, compared to who he had been facing, this was his 13th pro fight, you could say this was maybe a step up fight. You can't get any footage of this fight. There are pictures, and on some of those pictures, if you Google them, you will see that Golden Boy are tweeting that this has been Wilder's toughest test so far. And why was it Wilder's toughest test so far? Well, if you look at it on BoxRec, it says here, Scholes was down 4 times in the fight. To be expected, been stopped loads of times in there against the big puncher, but it says Wilder was down once. All right, Wilder down once in this fight. Now, you cannot find footage of this fight. And for the longest part, people speculated as to why that was. Some have said that in reality, what happened was a bit like what happened against that Dustin Nichols guy, where Wilder, poor footwork, which he's always had throughout his career, feet got tangled, went down, referee actually ruled it a knockdown, but nothing to worry about. However, many others, and I've seen many others who've said that when there was footage there, they seen it with their own 2 eyes, that Wilder was hit by a right hand by Harold Scholes, was hurt, legitimately went down. The referee called it a knockdown. Wilder was in bad shape after that knockdown, but was saved by a very slow count. Now, without the footage there to see, it's very hard to say what it is. But for me, if there is footage there, right, and if it was a simple stumble, bad footwork, yeah, of course, people might laugh and say, oh, look at that bad footwork, and the referee calls it a knockdown. But that's not anything that you'd really be too worried about people seeing. You might see it and some people might laugh and say, look at that footwork, but it's not anything that you would necessarily be, wanting to keep away from the public eye. Even now to this day, you still can't find it. Leads me to believe that he probably was quite badly hurt, and that if it did, maybe when it's all said and done, we may very well see it. Who knows? But I tend to suspect that he probably was quite badly buzzed. It'd be very interesting to see if someone could even get Harold Scolan on an interview. If he's even still, is he even still alive? I think he is. And be able to say what exactly happened. Because that's one that that is a bit of lost media in a way. Now, Deontay Wilder, he came back against a guy called Dan Sheehan. That was about a little over a month later. He got a first round knockout there. I think that was in Lafayette, Louisiana. So he was kind of traveling around on some of the bigger shows. And then when he wasn't on some of the bigger shows, he was just fighting these run-of-the-mill guys. But then we're not really seeing much. Again, he's not really stepping up. Fights a guy called Damon Reed in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. JD, who was also the trainer / manager of Deontay Wilder, he puts on a lot of shows. He was able to get Wilder on some of these shows, so he was able to get a win there over him. Dominic Alexander, whose name does ring a bell. Again, that was on another show in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So fighting in Alabama, fighting these guys like this David Long guy in Cincinnati, Ohio. That was again Richard Schaefer on an undercard of Adrian Broner. Also same on the card that night was Gary Russell Jr. So and I'm surprised other fighters don't actually do this, to be honest, which it seems like this doesn't happen as much these days. Between being on these big shows, he's also taken these kind of just stay active fights. I like seeing fighters do that, even if they are fighting a who's he. At least they're being able to get ring time. But yeah, Wilder's still fighting the same kind of run-of-the-mill. Marlon Hayes, got rid of him in 4 rounds. Jesse Oman, I think that was, Cancun in Mexico. So Wilder, he's going on the road. I think at this time, he might have even been sparring, because it was kind of around about 2012 thereabouts, where he was being used as a sparring partner in the Klitschko camp, right? I remember Johnny Nelson famously said that Wilder was dropped repeatedly by Vladimir Klitschko, even to the body. Now, Klitschko dropping Wilder, well believe it. To the body, I think that might be a bit dubious, because Klitschko was never a real body puncher. I mean, when he fought Povetkin, there wasn't a single body shot from Klitschko recorded by CompuBox in a 12-round fight. Do I think he was dropped by Klitschko? Definitely. But do I think it was through the body? Dubious. Fought guys like Owen Becks, Kirsten Manswell. Kirsten Manswell does ring a bell. I'd like to see what card that was on. That was on a Fox show. Dimitri Salita actually fought on that card. Obviously, he was a boxer in his own right. Thomas Williams Jr. That guy fought the likes of Marcus Brown. He also challenged Adonis Stevenson for the light heavyweight world title. Not exactly one who had the most heart in the ring. Then he fought a guy called Damon McCreary, who was unbeaten at the time. Alright, this was again on one of Richard Schaefer's shows. This was on Fox. Luis Ramon Jr. It says here, headlined the card. But this Damon McCreary guy, now he finished his career 15-7. So I think after that Wilder fight, he had one more win, but that was it. Now this guy, when they fought, right, that was in September 2012. Okay, this guy started his professional career in 1998. Started at 168 pounds. So he was a super middleweight, and by the time he fought Deontay Wilder in 2012, he was weighing 262 pounds, nearly 100 pounds heavier than he was when he made his pro debut, some 14 years earlier. So he really didn't, he was unbeaten, but he really had no business being in there at heavyweight. And obviously got knocked out in a round. And look at this, Jordan Shamel, I think that's the guy who got absolutely, it was him. He got absolutely obliterated in a round by Murat Gassiev. Monster left hook that Gassiev landed nearly, I mean, that was a career-ending shot, really. I mean, he absolutely took the head off that guy. Lost to Amir Mansour, lost to Charles Martin, lost to Big Farmer Miller. Don't know who that guy is, but then he lost to Junior Anthony Wright, the guy who got knocked out in a round by Makhmudov on the Fury Ngannou undercard. That guy. Deontay Wilder gave him his first L. That was really, again, you know, a very poor resume in terms of depth of talent. Yes, I understand he's limited, But he's been pro at that point now for 4 years, and he was still fighting that low level of opponent. There was no, I mean, David McCreary was kind of seen as maybe a step up, but even then he was in 100 pounds overweight from what his actual fighting weight realistically should be. And we needed to see where Wilder was at, because he'd been pro for 4 years, as I said, and again, very low level. Yeah, fighting regularly, which is good. It's helping him along, but you know, these are who's he. Journeyman. You know, if you are going to fight journeyman, there are journeymen out there who, when I see a prospect fight them, you'll think like, oh my god, he's fighting the journeyman with X amount of losses. It's like, yeah, but to be fair, some of these journeymen, if you have any chinks in your armor, they'll show them, and on some nights they'll even turn around and beat you. So there are journeymen out there where, yeah, you should be beating them, and yeah, they are journeymen, but you kind of know what you're going to get with them. You know that with some, they're going to try to win. You know that with some, you're going to have to work your way into the fight. You're going to have to think about certain things. Whereas these journeymen he was fighting here, I mean, they are just poor. Very, very poor. But Wilder, actually Christmas, the 15th of December 2012, Deontay Wilder had his first real step-up fight. This was on the undercard of Amir Khan versus Carlos Molina. Leo Santa Cruz fought on the undercard. Sean Porter, Alfredo Angulo, Frankie Gomez, Errol Spence, Jojo Diaz, Marcus Brown. As I said, a lot of these old undercards, when you go back and look at them years later, you're like, Errol Spence, Marcus Brown, Deontay Wilder, Alfredo Angulo, Porter, and Leo Santa Cruz. Imagine all those names on an undercard in 2019. You'd think, oh wow, this has a who's who of fighters. Back then, they were all in the prospect stage. I mean, that was Errol Spence's second career pro fight. That was Marcus Brown's second career pro fight. That was Porter's 21st, so all these names. But he fought this guy, Calvin Price. I think Calvin Price was in his late 30s at the time. And I remember going into that fight, there was talk about that fight because it was seen as a step up for Deontay Wilder. Price hadn't set the world alight, but he had looked a lot more technically sound than Wilder. Wilder at that stage, he'd only really shown punching power. That was primarily it. He had just shown punching power. He hadn't shown any boxing ability, any good ring IQ. He hadn't really shown anything. So people at the time were thinking, okay, if Calvin Price is as good a boxer as many think, he might just outbox this guy. He might just completely outbox him. If he can stay away from the right hand, you're looking at Wilder and you're seeing a big puncher, but very limited. And bear in mind, this is the end of 2012. The heavyweight division at that point, I mean, the heavyweight division is still in a very bad place. There's no Alexander Usyk. He's still fighting in the amateurs, in the WSB. And at the amateurs, he was fighting a heavyweight, which is cruiserweight, in the pros. Joshua hadn't turned pro yet. At the time in the UK, you had three main heavyweights. You had David Haye, who was seen at the time as the best in the UK. And then you had Tyson Fury, who was still, up and coming at the time. He wasn't established as of yet. And you also had David Price, who at the time, end of 2012, I think ESPN had him Prospect of the Year. I know that's amazing. And also, many people felt that if they had fought Price and Fury, that David Price would have won. Now, I know it's easy to look back now and laugh and say, imagine Price fight. At the time, a lot of people would have actually favoured David Price. You go back and look at some interviews with David Price in the comments. Most people were favouring him. He was looking more impressive. John McDermott, Fury struggled with him. David Price had an easier time. So at that time, that was the UK landscape of heavyweight. In the US, it was even worse than that. I mean, you could probably argue that the two best heavyweights in the US at the time were probably Tony Thompson and Chris Arreola. Guys who in today's era of heavyweights, although Chris Arreola is still knocking around, but you took them in their prime and put them in this era of heavyweights, would they even crack the top 20? Maybe. But you look at some of the talent we have in the heavyweight division today compared to back then, it's night and day. And bear in mind, in the US, as I said, that was so tit on the ground that you looked at people like Calvin Price and you thought, maybe. Because Wilder hasn't shown anything other than punching power. Tremendous punching power, but not a whole lot of punching power. Now, Calvin Price, I think he was about 6'6", 6'7". Yeah, 6'7" with an 82-inch reach. Not a particularly big puncher. You know, he only was able to get 6 knockout wins out of 14 wins altogether. So not a devastating, it doesn't even have a 50% KO ratio. But he went in there against Wilder, and arguably he was outboxing Wilder for the first 2 rounds. There wasn't much going. As it's so often the case with Wilder, when he fights tall opponents, he tends to have a low punch output and just to look for that right hand. He did find it in the 3rd round. It was a massive right hand. Knocked Kelvin Price damn near into the ropes. He was done at that point. Goes then from that, has a fight against a guy called Matthew Guerrero, I think is how you say that guy's name. That was in Mexico. Before actually fighting on another one of Amir Khan's undercards. This time it was Amir Khan versus Julio Diaz in Sheffield. This was in the UK. Amir Khan fought Julio Diaz. We all remember that fight. I think that was on Box Nation. And he fought Audley Harrison. I think that was Harrison's last fight. I think Harrison had just won the prize fighter tournament, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he did. He actually just won the prize fighter tournament. Imagine that. Here's your reward. You get to fight Deontay Wilder. Hey. At the time, that wasn't the Wilder with WBC title who was making a lot of money. It was a fairly green, although this was his 28th professional fight, Deontay Wilder against Audley Harrison. Harrison got taken out in a round. We got to see Wilder swing for the fences in that fight. Well, he did. He swung for the fences. He was able to get him out of there. You look at this card. Jack Catterall was on this card. Dave Allen was on this card. Anthony Ogogo, Gary Sainz, Terry Flanagan. So a lot of names that we would come to recognise in UK boxing were on this card. So that was arguably Wilder's best win. Then he goes in there and he fights in his next fight Sergey Lukovic. Again, another one of Richard Schaefer, Eric Gomez's. Jamal Charlo headlined, Francisco Vargas, Gary Russell Jr., Gerald Washington, Robert Easter Jr. A lot of names, as I said again, you'll recognise. This was one of Wilder's most devastating knockouts. Now, Sergey Lukovic, former WBO, he was WBO champion in the mid-2000s. Again, it shows where the division was at. He actually lost that title in the 12th round to Shannon Briggs. Again, showing where the heavyweight division was in the early 2000s, early to mid-2000s, early 2010s. On the ground, it was just Klitschko and that was it. Both Klitschko's, and there was really nobody. Like Lukovic, again today, where would he be in the division? A prime Lukovic, I don't think he'd get very far. He was knocked out really badly in a round. Wilder backed Lukovic up to the ropes, landed a right hand, and Lukovic was spasming on the canvas. Really, really scary knockout. Really big knockout. That was another win for Deontay Wilder. He was getting ranked at this stage by the WBC. As you'll see, this was for the Continental America's Heavyweight Championship. So what you'll see fighters do today, and it kind of really started back then in the early to kind of 2010s, was that you saw all these tricket titles, these intercontinentals, these European, not the EBU, just like the IBF, WBC, European. Here you go. They're chucking these little tricket titles around. And by fighting and defending them, you're not defending them against much, but you're defending them. You're paying sanction fees. You're being bumped up the rankings just purely by defending it. I mean, you look at Anthony Yarde. I think he was WBO European or Continental champion at light heavyweight. It basically got him a mandatory crack at Sergey Kovalev. He won it against, I think, some Hungarian guy and just defended it. Boom, you're number one ranked. And that's what a lot of fighters are starting to do now. Well, they've been doing it for a while. So Deontay Wilder goes, he defends that title again, this time in a 10-rounder against Nicola Furta. Furta, another heavyweight journeyman, 21-11. I think he's fought Fury. Well, Wilder was his last fight. He got busted up quite bad and taken out quite brutally. Yeah, he fought Jonathan Banks, Tyson Fury, fought Povetkin. Who else has he fought? He's got a win over that Jason Bergen guy. He's a journeyman himself. Nevin Pikich lost to him. So not a particularly stellar heavyweight. Actually went the distance with Povetkin, to be fair, in a 10-rounder. Wilder took care of him in 4 rounds. Then we go to Puerto Rico. March 15th, 2014. Danny Garcia, Mauricio Herrera. On the undercard, we saw Deontay Wilder in a 12-rounder against Malik Scott, the man who trains Deontay Wilder now. In that fight, a lot of people are very dubious about that knockout. Wilder leads with a left hook and throws a right hand down the middle. It almost appears to be blocked by Scott, but he goes down, sits the count out. A lot of people believe that fight was not a real fight, we'll just say. Some people felt that Scott had some issues outside the ring and wanted to kind of, do us a little favour there. Now, I don't think even if he had tried, he would have beaten Wilder anyway. but he might have negotiated his way longer into the fight because Scott was quite a negative fighter, to be fair, a very negative fighter. But that put Deontay Wilder in line to challenge for the WBC Heavyweight Championship. Now, at the time, that WBC title, no one had it. So Vitaly Klitschko had his last fight against Manuel Charr in 2012, as far as I believe. He was given an awful lot of time by the WBC to make up his mind about what he wanted to do next. He ended up retiring. That title became vacant. It was challenged for by the next available contenders, which was Bermane Stiverne and Chris Arreola. And they fought, I think it was ESPN they fought on. Stiverne knocked Arreola out in 6 rounds. It was a rematch from a fight they had in 2013. Stiverne won that fight on points. Arreola was doing better in this fight until the 6th round when he got caught. He got taken out brutally by Stiverne. Stiverne became the WBC champion, but he had to make a mandatory defense against Deontay Wilder. Now, in that time, Deontay Wilder had a fight on the undercard of Sean Porter versus Kell Brook. We remember that fight in Carson, California. Sakio Bika lost to Anthony Durrell on that card. Omar Figueroa, Jorge Linares, Dominic Brazil, Callum Smith, Jason Quigley, and Luke Campbell, just to name a few. You look at these old undercards and you're like, all these names I recognise. He went in there against that Jason Gavin guy. Gavin was in no kind of shape. He quit after 4 rounds. Gavin actually fought Joshua the next year. But that was Deontay Wilder's 32nd fight. And in those 32 fights, 32 straight knockouts. Again, competition was not amazing, so you would expect that, but he was still showing tremendous punching power. But now the real asset test began, because Muhammad Ali's birthday, the 1st of January 2015, the 17th, he would be in there in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada, against Bermane Stiverne. Now, at that time, a lot of people, this was a Golden Boy promotion in association with good old Don King. A lot of people at that time felt that Stiverne would win. Ringside, which was a show Sky Sports used to do back in the day, it would kind of be like a boxing podcast or something kind of like that. They'd interview fighters, Adam Smith, Matthew Macklin, people like that, beyond Johnny Nelson. They stopped doing it in late 2016. I think it was just it outgrown itself. I think a lot of people relied on YouTube to do the work for them. But a lot of them were picking Stiverne to win this fight, either by stoppage or on points. They thought it would catch up to Wilder, because bear in mind, he was knocking all these guys out. He'd never gone past 4 rounds in 32 professional fights. Never gone past 4 rounds. He'd been pro since 2008. He'd never gone past 4 rounds. On this card, we saw Eric Molina. We saw Vyacheslav Shabransky, the light heavyweight contender. We also saw Leo Santa Cruz. And we saw Deontay Wilder against Bermane Stiverne, and it can only be described as a tremendous beat that Wilder dished out to Stiverne. He did everything but drop him, although he did technically drop him in the 2nd round. It should have been called a knockdown. It wasn't. The referee didn't actually call it, but he dropped Stiverne. He did everything but stop him. Stiverne took a Hail Mary beating in there. Wilder won. One judge gave Wilder every round, and you can't even argue with that. There was a couple of rounds, like the 6th round, where Stiverne kind of tried, but for the most part it was Wilder keeping his distance, outboxing a smaller, slow-footed heavyweight, a plotter, and he had an easy time of it. That was that. Now, after that fight, Wilder said in interviews that he wanted to become an active champion. He wanted to fight regularly, that he still saw himself as a contender. Vladimir Klitschko had the titles, had all the other titles. There was chances to unify. Did they happen? Nope. Klitschko ended up going and fighting his mandatory in Tyson Fury. Wilder had his homecoming to Alabama as a champion against Eric Molina in June of 2015. Sky Sports had this fight actually shown. I remember staying up for it, expecting an easy win, because Molina had lost his pro debut, had been knocked out in a round by Arreola, hadn't shown any real durability. Went in there, and this is the most heart I think we've ever seen in his career, Eric Molina show against Deontay Wilder. Wilder was in control. He had Molina down in the 4th and in the 5th. He had him down a couple of times. But in that 3rd round, he was caught by a little left hook by Molina, which just did appear to stun Wilder a bit. He recovered, was able to take Molina out in the 9th round with a big shot. Only after that fight was back out in September. And bear in mind, I think it was just before or just after the Molina fight, Povetkin knocked out Mike Perez in a round over in Russia to become WBC mandatory challenger. So Povetkin was Wilder's mandatory, and that was a damn good mandatory, right? That wasn't a weak, that was a good mandatory. But Wilder had a bit of time before the mandatory was called. So he went in there and he fought Johann Duhaupas again in Alabama, in Birmingham, Alabama. A real big beating he gave to Johann Duhaupas. Never dropped him, to be fair, never dropped him. What Johann Duhaupas was doing was his chin was down so low that he took a lot of shots on the nose and forehead. His nose was mashed up, but his forehead was quite red. But he was ultimately able to last until the 11th round, and then he was finally taken out by Deontay Wilder. And to be honest with you, that fight right there was one of Wilder's better performances. I know it took him a long time, but you see what he was doing in there. It wasn't a bad performance by Deontay Wilder. Then he had one more tune-up fight before he would go and have to make his mandatory against Povetkin. This was against Artur Szpilka. Now, Szpilka going into this fight only had one loss. He only had one loss, and that was against a guy called Brian Jennings. Brian Jennings, heavyweight contender. He actually went the distance with Vladimir Klitschko in MSG in April of 2015. He was able to stop Artur Szpilka very late in their respective fight. Szpilka was 233 pounds in that fight, Wilder 228. Now, Szpilka was a southpaw with good movement. He was a pound shop, to say the least, Alexander Usyk. But he was able to confuse Deontay Wilder. You look at the scorecards, 78-74 twice to Wilder and 77-75 to Deontay Wilder. So it was close. Some people felt Szpilka was actually winning the fight. Into the 9th round they go. Szpilka gets a little bit too aggressive, makes a little mistake, and he takes one of the best right hands Deontay Wilder could have thrown. And I mean, he was stretchered. He was done, gone, finished. He was stretchered out of there. It was one of the biggest knockouts of 2016. And 2016 was only 16 days old. And believe me, 2016 was not a great year for boxing, but it was a year for big knockouts. I don't even think that won knockout of the year. I think that was Canelo versus Khan that won knockout of the year that year. But it was a massive knockout. Then it was a case of waiting. When are they going to announce Povetkin Wilder? May 2016, Povetkin would go to Russia. They lost the purse bid. Team Wilder, they had to go to Russia to face Alexander Povetkin. So Wilder, on that undercard, Charles Martin fought Vyacheslav Glasov. He won. Some people were saying, could Wilder vacate and just go and fight Charles Martin? Easy fight. They're both American, both fighting on the same network. By now, Wilder's fighting with PBC, working with Lou DiBella and PBC. Easy fight to make. No. He said he was going to fight his mandatory, to his credit. And that's what he did. Did he fight him? No, he didn't. Was that Wilder's fault? No, it wasn't. Povetkin failed the PED test for a substance called meldonium, which he had been using prior. It hadn't been banned at the time. Now, this is where it kind of gets a little bit grey, because Povetkin had passed a couple of drug tests, as far as I believe, and then failed one. And he claimed it was trace amounts. But why would you pass some and then fail others? The WBC couldn't really make heads or tails of it. So what they did is they said, right, Wilder could have another fight. You're not mandatory, Povetkin. You're going to have to fight one more fight. You're going to have to fight Bermane Stiverne. That's going to have the interim title on the line. And the winner will therefore be mandated to fight Deontay Wilder. Now, that seems like a bit of a punishment, because it's like, okay, we're not giving you your shot. You're going to have to earn it again. You're going to have to fight Stiverne, who only had one fight in the interim at the time against a guy called Derek Rossi. That was set for December 2016. I think it was around about the 18th thereabouts in 2016, just before Christmas. What happened? Povetkin failed another drugs test, this time for Osterine, and boy did he look jacked in that fight. He didn't fight Stiverne. Stiverne said, no go, I ain't fighting, in his right to do so. Said, no go, going back to the States. Went back to the States. He fought Johann Duhaupas. Povetkin looked jacked to the teeth. Knocked Johann Duhaupas out in, I think, 6 rounds. Became a real question what happens next. I'll get to that now in a wee bit. But Wilder was given an interim fight. He ended up going in there and fighting Chris Arreola. Arreola, who had retired, I think, at least once anyway, prior to that fight, ended up getting stopped in the 8th round. Wilder looked to have an injury to his arm, and he certainly hurt his hand in that fight, so he would need time to recover. I think that was one of the reasons why they ended up putting the interim title on the line, because Wilder was actually injured following on from that fight. Then it was a case of, right, what happens next? Wilder, is he going to fight a mandatory? Is he not? What's going on with the whole mandatory situation? Wilder was given another run out early 2017. Now, Gerald Washington there was the opponent. I cannot remember the guy's name. I think it was an Austrian fighter. Andre something something his name was. His name escapes me. But the original opponent was, I think, an Austrian heavyweight who was a fairly obscure run-of-the-mill heavyweight who Alexander Povetkin knocked out in 3 rounds in 2016. That was on the undercard of Guillermo Jones versus Denis Lebedev. That's who Wilder was going to fight. No one wanted to see it. And amazingly, that guy ended up failing the PED test too. Go figure. So then it was a case of, right, you need another opponent because you're getting some pretty damn bad luck with these PED tests. They got Gerald Washington, who was unbeaten at the time. I think he'd beaten Eddie Chambers, or at least he had the draw with Eddie Chambers. I think, he actually had the draw with Amir Mansour, beaten Eddie Chambers and Ray Austin, stopped Ray Austin, had wins over Jason Gavin and the likes. So he was put in there against Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder getting outboxed in that fight. But if you look at the scorecards, they will tell a different story. One of them had a Wilder ahead. Don't know how he could have, but he had him. And the other two had a draw. Washington was winning that fight. He got taken out with the right hand in the 5th round. Yeah, you probably could have let that fight carry on a little bit longer. Michael Griffin was the referee, who's normally a good referee and is normally not the quickest stopper of a fight, but he stopped that one a little bit on the early side, just for my liking. Of course, then we're in a situation where it's like, what is going on? At that time, we're hearing the name Dillian Whyte mentioned a lot. He's really wanting this Deontay Wilder fight. Eddie Hearn is mentioning Dillian Whyte and saying, let's get this fight done. Let's get Wilder versus Dillian Whyte. However, there comes the issue of the mandatory. There's also a guy floating around called Luis Ortiz. So then, November of 2017, Wilder is set to fight again. Is it going to be Dillian Whyte? It's not going to be Dillian Whyte. It was going to be Luis Ortiz. This was a bit, because Ortiz at this time was a bit of a dark horse. No one really knew what they were going to get with Luis Ortiz. Ortiz had looked good. He'd beaten the likes of Brian Jennings a lot more convincingly than Vladimir Klitschko had. Called himself the real King Kong. He was looking good. He was seen as a real heavyweight that people feared. And people were like, we don't know what's going to happen here. Wilder was going to go in there, give him a voluntary shot and fight him. What happened? Yeah, sound like a broken record here, don't I? Failed another test. Well, another fighter failed a test. I think Ortiz had failed tests in his career as well against Latif Coyote, who we stopped in a round. Failed the test for that fight. This one, I think, was to do with, he claimed blood pressure medication. I mean, God knows if you're a professional athlete why you'd have high blood pressure, go figure. Anyway, WBC said, okay, now you got to make a mandatory defense. Right, but there was no final eliminator. No, they just gave it to Stavern anyway. One fight since the Wilder fight in 2015. It's now 2017. And that fight that he had against Eric Rossi where he struggled to a decision. 2 years had passed since that fight. But hey, he's mandatory. Alright, so he's rematching Bermain Stavern. The only guy to take Wilder the distance. The 13th round, how did it go? He got knocked out in a round. Got absolutely brutalised in there by Deontay Wilder. Vicious knockout. Some would argue Bermain Stavern was never the same after the first beating he took. Well, he definitely wasn't the same after the second beating. I mean, the first fight was 12 rounds. It was pretty brutal. This fight was even more brutal. It was over in 2 minutes. So Deontay Wilder moves on. That's the mandatory taken care of. And they try and they get the Luis Ortiz fight redone. Rescheduled. Yes, he will fight Luis Ortiz March the 3rd, 2018, in a time where Tyson Fury had been, and he'd gone. He'd been, they actually, in the Spilka fight, came face to face for the first time post-fight. Fury went through his issues, well documented, we know all about them. He was talking about coming back. Joshua was getting ready to fight Joseph Parker at the end of March in a unification, and Deontay Wilder was going to take on Luis Ortiz, 28-0 at the time. This was in Brooklyn, the Barclays Center. Luis Ortiz, Wilder, they put on a show. It was a tremendous fight. Ortiz was down in the 5th round from a big right hand. He rallied back and he really buzzed Wilder bad in the 7th round. Going into the 8th round, something very strange happened. The doctor normally will check a fighter who's taken a beating in a round in between rounds, but he waited until after the minute's rest to call Deontay Wilder over and check him again, which gave him like a 20-30 second rest on top of that. So by the time he went out for the 8th round, he was fully recovered. Luis Ortiz pretty much sold out in that 8th round, trying to get Wilder out of there. Once he couldn't, that was it. He had nothing left, and he was taken out by Deontay Wilder in the 10th. Arguably Wilder's best win. From then, you kind of thought, okay, we're going to get this unification with AJ. We're going to get it done now because you've no mandatory. AJ has the belts. Let's go. We didn't get that, unfortunately. But we did get Wilder versus Tyson Fury in December. Now, if you had told me January 2018 that we would end the year with Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder, I would have laughed straight in your face and said, come back to me with something that's realistic. But that's exactly what we got. Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder, the trilogy, as you'll see there, that is literally the tale of 3 fights. This was the first, right? This was the first. The 1st of December 2018, it was a split decision draw for Deontay. Well, for both guys, it was a draw. Nobody lost. Phil Edwards scored it a draw. One judge scored it wide to Deontay Wilder. Robert Tapper had it to Fury. Fury outboxed Deontay Wilder throughout. We saw the limitations of Wilder, even against the less than 100%, far less than 100% Tyson Fury. We saw the limitations, but we also saw the power. He dropped Fury in the 9th round. Fury touched down, wasn't badly hurt, was able to recover, and able to win the 10th and the 11th round pretty easily. But, big, huge, boom, right hand goes in by Deontay Wilder in that 12th round. Looks for all the world like Tyson Fury is out. He's going to get counted out. A lot of referees, credit to Jack Reese, would have waved that fight off. He didn't. He let Fury get up, get to his feet. Fury was able to land shots on Deontay Wilder coming in. Arguably won the remaining part of the round. I felt Fury won the fight, but it was scored a draw. Okay. We're going to get a rematch? Well, we will, but we have to wait a little over a year for that. In the immediate time, a mandatory had come up in the form of Dominic Breazeale. Dominic Breazeale was set to challenge Deontay Wilder. They ended up meeting in May of 2019. This was a little 3 kind of fight period where within the space of a month you had Wilder, Joshua, Fury all fighting. I think a 2-week gap in between each. Wilder was the first and arguably the most impressive in terms of the win out of them all, or certainly the most devastating out of them all. Maybe the Ruiz beating Joshua was the most impressive. But he went in there, I mean, honestly, that punch is just, yeah. What's the guy's name? Mauro Ranallis. I love his commentary where he says, Wilder hit Breazeale so hard, they are feeling it in Brazil. Matthew Macklin let a big roar out on commentary when that shot landed. I mean, it was a proper, honestly, I mean, how in God's name Dominic Breazeale is even okay to this day is beyond me after taking that shot. Good Lord. It was, that right there was just something else. It really was. Didn't get the Fury rematch immediately after. He ended up rematching Luis Ortiz in a fight that wasn't as entertaining as the first fight. Luis Ortiz was completely outboxing Deontay Wilder in that fight, did what he needed to do up until the 7th round, and he got caught with another big right hand. This time he didn't get back up. Unlike the first fight where he got caught with a right hand, this time he was done. Counted out. Luis Ortiz taken out in the 7th round, which then freed up Deontay Wilder. Now we're into the championship rounds, possibly of Deontay Wilder's career. 2020, February the 22nd, 2020, Tyson Fury, Wilder 2. Co-promotion, Bob Arum, Top Rank, and PBC, who were representing Deontay Wilder across 2 networks. I believe it was Showtime, actually, who showed the fight. No, sorry, it was Fox Pay-Per-View and ESPN. Some ESPN fighters on the card, Top Rank, some PBC. These guys met in the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. Wilder came in 231, which is heavy by his standards, but Fury 273, which was even heavier, much heavier. This was a easy fight. We all thought it would be competitive. We had worries for Fury, but we all were shocked how easy this fight was. Tyson Fury beat the living crap out of Deontay Wilder. He had him down in the 3rd round and in the 5th from a body shot, and he stopped Deontay Wilder in the 7th round. Deontay Wilder's cornerman Mark Breland came up, he threw in the towel, it stopped the fight, and that was it. Now, Deontay Wilder, throughout his career, had always been a very loud character. Someone who was always never afraid to be in front of the camera, would always say whatever he thought, If his rivals were fighting, he'd always have something to say. And after this fight, he went MIA. He went missing in action. We didn't hear from him for a long, long time. We heard stories about the suit being too heavy. We heard stories of Tyson Fury having egg weights in his glove. In fact, the Deontay Wilder fanboys said, look how deformed his gloves were. And you're looking at it and you're thinking, that's from the first fight. And they're horsehair gloves. That's what they're supposed to do. And they had to backtrack and say, well, he cheated in both fights. What, the first fight, a year later, you're only saying it? Then it was spike water. Then it was all this nonsense. His brother, Marcel, has even said that he had an autopsy. Missed the part where he died. But all this nonsense coming out. And you're thinking, he can't actually believe this. Now, you knew there was a rematch clause both way. And you're thinking, is he even going to want that rematch after that fight? Does he really? He's not going to believe. He's not going to believe what they're saying. Is he? Yeah, he did. Well, on the surface, he did. Made a video in about November, I think it was 2020, saying that he had proof that Tyson Fury cheated, all this nonsense. Got rid of Mark Breland for simply doing his job, but kept the likes of JD's, who, if there was weights in Fury's gloves, I mean, wasn't he there when the hands were getting wrapped? Wouldn't he have seen that? So, I mean, that's a fairly big thing to miss if you missed it. And he's still in the camp with Mark Breland for looking out for your best interest isn't. But apparently he was a double agent. Yeah. Right. Anyway, moving on from that, we're thinking, okay, look, he's got the rematch. But, like, realistically, you know, has he gone over that time period? Because it was over a year. You know, I think it was like 2021. There was talk about Fury versus Joshua. Fury was even saying that he was onto a prince in Saudi Arabia about getting this fight over the line. Announcement was imminent. And then only about a day or so later, a court of arbitration ruled in Deontay Wilder's favour, which meant that we had to see Fury versus Wilder yet again for a third time. And there was no real hype about this one, not that much anyway. It was set for July 15, 2021. Had to get pushed back. It got pushed back until October the 9th, 2021. Arguably, though, we weren't really hyped for it, but it was arguably the best fight of the trilogy. Certainly, in my opinion, this was the best. Fury versus Wilder 3. Scorecards were all for Fury come the 11th round. It was tremendous. Wilder was down twice. Fury was down twice. There was back and forths. Wilder in this fight, this was the first fight where he changed trainer. So gone was Mark Breland, who wasn't loyal despite the fact he was looking out for his fighter's best interest, which is kind of the whole purpose of a corner. Yeah. Anyway, he had Malik Scott in the corner. Scott, he wasn't going to ruffle any feathers. And Wilder came in 238. Yeah, very heavy by his standards. And he was, shock horror, blowing after about 2 rounds. Amazing that. Strange how that happens. He wasn't able to match Fury in the clinches. He was able to drop him. But ultimately, it was just futile. Futile. He ended up getting stopped viciously in the 11th round. That was the worst knockout of his career. That was the worst loss still of his career, that third fight with Fury. The second fight was devastating. He was dominated, but he wasn't knocked out that bad as he was in the third fight. That really was a kind of, right, where does he go from here? What does he do? I just didn't know at that point. It's a year later, October the 15th, 2022, he makes his comeback fight. Lighter, significantly lighter, over 20 pounds lighter, 214 pounds, against Robert Helenius, who was a former sparring partner of Deontay Wilder. And it was a case of, okay, let's see what's left. He should be getting through this fight pretty easily. And he did. Landed a big right hand towards the back end of the first round. Knocked Robert Helenius into outer space. This guy was gonzo from that right hand. And you thought, okay, Wilder looks back. He's looking back. We still have the punching power. We still have the ferocity. Or so we thought. Now, we heard nothing from him for the majority of 2023 until we started hearing about Joshua being involved with the Saudis, big shows coming up, right? We're hearing, could it be Wilder versus Joshua? Is that what we're going to get? Are we going to get Wilder versus Joshua? As the year progressed, Joshua had his fight against Franklin. He was meant to fight Dylan White. He ended up fighting Robert Helenius. He didn't look good. Eddie Hearn going into that Helenius fight mentioned Wilder. But then talk was not from Wilder at that point. There's talk of Joshua for the IBF. We're not hearing Deontay Wilder. It looks like we're going to go through the calendar year of 2023 without seeing Deontay Wilder in the ring. We knew nothing about it. There's talk Fury is going to fight Alexander Usyk on December the 23rd in Saudi Arabia. But Fury has a very tough fight with Francis Ngannou, and that date gets pushed back to February. So there's a gap in the market for December the 23rd. Then we hear of a card called the Day of Reckoning. And you hear the names and you're thinking, this must not be real. Wilder, Joshua, Dubois, Miller, Hrgovic, Frank Sanchez, Bivol, Opataya. It can't be real. Well, it is. We had the press conference, we seen it. So Wilder would finish the calendar year of 2023 with a fight, a very competitive fight, mind you, against Joseph Parker. Now, going into that fight, Parker had been knocked out by Joe Joyce in a fight in which he gave, but he ultimately ended up getting stopped. So he's going in there against Deontay Wilder, who looked like his old self, or at least similar, against Hellenius. But we only seen him for less than 3 minutes. We didn't really know where he was at. Is he the same as he used to be? Unlikely, but how far removed is he? Is he massively removed, or is there still a good little bit of Wilder left there? Oh boy, did we ever find out. On Saturday, we found out big time that Wilder isn't just lacking fundamentals, they've never been there anyway, but now is lacking that killer instinct. He's lacking that will to win. He's lacking everything. And he gets beaten comprehensively. Doesn't get stopped, but comprehensively outboxed and schooled by Joseph Parker. And following on from that, that was it, or at least that tends to be it. 43 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses. It looks like that is it for Deontay Wilder. That was his last fight, his most recent fight, and to be honest with you, based upon that performance, I don't really see much else to come. There may be an Anthony Joshua fight in the future, possibly, but after that performance, I mean, who really would pick Deontay Wilder to even last mid-rounds with Joshua based upon that performance? That is Wilder's career in a nutshell. As in-depth as I feel I could get. Obviously, I don't want this video going on too long, but that is Wilder's career in a nutshell. He's had title reigns. I think he has one of the longest in history at over 5 years. Defended the title 10 times. Given us many good memories through the years. Whatever you feel about Deontay Wilder as a person, you cannot help but enjoy, certainly prime Wilder, when he was on it. He was letting the shots go. He was getting big knockouts. He'd be losing fights. He'd land big right hands. Whatever you think about a fighter as a person, you have to look at what they've given to the fans. And he's given us so much entertainment over the years. If Wilder is done, if he goes away from the sport, if he decides to go, be with his family, do his other ventures, all I can say is thank you for the good times. Because it has been worth staying up till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to watch some of these big knockouts, to watch some of these big moments, and to be part of some of these big fights. They've been incredible to be part of. Whether you like him, whether you love him, hate him, or indifferent, he was, in his prime, one of the most entertaining heavyweights you will see. Historically, he is one of the biggest punchers the heavyweight division has ever seen, certainly with the right hand. And Deontay Wilder, if it's all said and done, if that was his swan song, listen, thank you for the good times you've given. Because he really has given some great times in the ring. Is there more to come? I seriously doubt it. But what he's left us with, me, I'm happy with. That is my thoughts on everything. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought of this video. I mentioned some fighters in there who I will eventually get round to covering, and AB being one of them. But for now, I will leave you with that. I hope you all enjoyed it, lads and lassies. Peace.